experiences in my preparations for this COP26 summit, because it's so obvious that for some people, some communities, some countries at this COP, the transformation that is happening now is not a matter for, as I was saying, it's for our children and our grandchildren. This is something that is an existential threat as we sit here in Glasgow today. And last year, 600 billion tons of ice melted away in Greenland. All that water has to go somewhere. And it's incredibly cruel that these vulnerable, small island states are right in the front line of the loss and damage that is caused by global warming. And of course, as they have said, as our friends have said, they have done virtually nothing to cause the problem. They didn't produce the huge volumes of CO2 that have been pumped into the atmosphere. So I would encourage every country that has benefited from pumping CO2 into the air over the last, whatever it is, 250 years, to join this campaign and to help. And that's why we've made the $100 billion a year commitment, the $100 billion a year commitment, such a crucial part of the UK's presidency and pre-presidency. And I think that we've got to do it. We've got to help people to adapt. We've got to mitigate, but above all, we've got to change the numbers. We've got to bend the curve. We've got to stop this remorseless increase in CO2, because there are people around this room whose populations, vulnerable populations who have done nothing to deserve it, will be in the front line and will suffer catastrophic loss and damage. And by the way, it's those small island states, and Frank was there, everybody, all those small island states who at Paris managed to change the ambition and ensure that we didn't just commit to keeping the increasing temperatures to 2 degrees, but keep it to 1.5. Because they knew the difference. They knew the difference between 2 and 1.5. And it's the difference for many people, and I don't want to exaggerate this, but the difference between life as we know it and not being able to continue with life as we know it. Between life and death. And that's the reality. And that's the reality we have to face in all sincerity. And I think it was Frank who taught me yesterday something that I didn't know. It's about 1.5. There's a very simple way of expressing the desire to keep 1.5 alive and survive at 1.5, and that's to make this sign. Does everybody know this? You got that, Tariq. Did you know that, Narendra? You did already. I was a new one on me. Anyway, I want to do it now. Keep 1.5 alive, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to the initiator of this vital initiative, my friend and colleague Narendra Modi. Narendra, over to you.
Excellencies, infrastructure for resilient island states आईरिस का लॉन्च एक नई आशा जगाता है, नया विश्वास देता है। ये सबसे वल्नरेबल देशों के लिए कुछ करने का संतोष देता है। मैं इसके लिए कोलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर CDRI को बधाई देता हूं। इस महत्वपूर्ण मंच पर मैं ऑस्ट्रेलिया और UK समेत सभी सहयोगी देशों और विशेषकर मॉरिशस और जमैका समेत छोटे द्वीप समूहों के लीडर्स का स्वागत करता हूं, उन्हें हार्दिक धन्यवाद देता हूं। मैं UN सेक्रेटरी जनरल का भी आभार व्यक्त करता हूं कि उन्होंने इस लॉन्च के लिए अपना बहुमूल्य समय दिया। एक्सेलेंसीज, पिछले कुछ दशकों ने सिद्ध किया है कि क्लाइमेट चेंज के प्रकोप से कोई भी अछूता नहीं है, चाहे वो विकसित देश हो या फिर प्राकृतिक संसाधनों से धनी देश हो, सभी के लिए ये बहुत बड़ा खतरा है। लेकिन इसमें भी क्लाइमेट चेंज से सबसे अधिक खतरा स्मॉल आइलैंड डेवलपिंग स्टेट्स सीड्स को है। ये उनके लिए जीवन मृत्यु की बात है। ये उनके अस्तित्व के लिए चुनौती है। क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से आई आपदाएं उनके लिए सचमुच प्रलय का रूप ले सकती है। ऐसे देशों के क्लाइमेट चेंज न सिर्फ उनके जीवन की सुरक्षा के लिए बल्कि उनकी अर्थव्यवस्था के लिए भी बड़ी चुनौती है। ऐसे देश टूरिज्म पर बहुत निर्भर हैं, लेकिन प्राकृतिक आपदाओं के चलते टूरिस्ट भी उनके पास आने से घबराते हैं। फ्रेंड्स, वैसे तो सीड्स देश सदियों से नेचर के साथ समन्वय में जीते रहे हैं। वे प्रकृति के स्वाभाविक साइकिल के साथ एडेप्ट करना जानते हैं, लेकिन पिछले कई दशकों में हुई स्वार्थपूर्ण व्यवहार की वजह से प्रकृति का जो अस्वाभाविक रूप सामने आया है, उसका परिणाम आज निर्दोष स्मॉल आइलैंड स्टेट्स झेल रहे हैं। और इसलिए मेरे लिए CDRI या आयरिस सिर्फ एक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की बात नहीं है, बल्कि ये मानव कल्याण के अत्यंत संवेदनशील दायित्व का हिस्सा है। ये मानव जाति के प्रति हम सभी की कलेक्टिव जिम्मेदारी है। ये एक तरह से हमारे पापों का साझा प्रायश्चित भी है। फ्रेंड्स, CDRI किसी सेमिनार से निकली कल्पना नहीं है, बल्कि CDRI का जन्म बरसों के मंथन और अनुभव का परिणाम है। छोटे द्वीप देशों पर मंडरा रहे क्लाइमेट चेंज के खतरे को भांपते हुए भारत ने पैसिफिक आइलैंड और कैरिकॉम देशों के साथ सहयोग के लिए विशेष व्यवस्थाएं बनाई। हमने उनके नागरिकों को सोलर तकनीकों में ट्रेन किया, वहां इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के विकास के लिए निरंतर योगदान दिया। इस कड़ी में आज इस प्लेटफॉर्म पर मैं भारत की ओर से एक और नई पहल की घोषणा कर रहा हूं। भारत की स्पेस एजेंसी इसरो सीड्स के लिए एक स्पेशल डेटा विंडो को निर्माण करेगी। इससे सीड्स को सैटेलाइट के माध्यम से साइक्लोन, कोरल रीफ मॉनिटरिंग, कोस्टलाइन मॉनिटरिंग आदि के बारे में टाइमली जानकारी मिलती रहेगी। फ्रेंड्स, आयरिस के साकार करने में CDRI और सीड्स दोनों ने मिलकर काम किया है। यह को क्रिएशन और को बेनिफिट्स का अच्छा उदाहरण है। इसलिए मैं आज आयरिस के लॉन्च को बहुत अहम मानता हूं। आयरिस के माध्यम से सीड्स को टेक्नोलॉजी, फाइनेंस, जरूरी जानकारी तेजी से मोबिलाइज करने में आसानी होगी। स्मॉल आइलैंड स्टेट्स के क्वालिटी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को प्रोत्साहन मिलने से वहां जीवन और आजीविका दोनों को लाभ मिलेगा। मैंने पहले भी कहा है कि दुनिया इन देशों को कम जनसंख्या वाले स्मॉल आइलैंड के रूप में देखती है, लेकिन मैं इन देशों को बड़े सामर्थ्य वाले लार्ज ओशन स्टेट्स के रूप में देखता हूं। जैसे समुद्र से निकले मोतियों की माला सबकी शोभा बढ़ाती है, वैसे ही समुद्र से घिरे सीड्स विश्व की भी शोभा बढ़ाते हैं। मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं कि भारत इस नई परियोजना को पूरा सहयोग देगा और इसकी सफलता के लिए CDRI अन्य पार्टनर देशों और संयुक्त राष्ट्र के साथ मिलकर काम करेगा। CDRI और सभी छोटे द्वीप समूहों को इस नई पहल के लिए फिर से बधाई और शुभकामनाएं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister Modi, and thank you for your great friendship to Australia, Narendra, and for inviting us to join you here today at this important forum. Thank you also, Boris, our COP26 commander, not Commander Bond, but Commander Boris, and leading us through this very important few weeks. And I'm particularly pleased to be here, like both of you, with our other island state nations. Australia is also an island state, It's a very big island. It's the biggest island continent in the world, but it does give us, I think, in the Pacific, a very unique perspective, as Frank knows, on the challenges facing island nations all around the world. And what we're speaking about here, of course, to address climate change, you have to reduce emissions, and that is a huge part of the response to climate change, of course, but we also have to adapt to live with the consequences of climate change that is already occurring, that is already built in, that is already going to impact on the lives and livelihoods, particularly of those in island nations all around the world. And we recognise that in Australia, and that's why working with everyone to adapt to climate change and the challenges in particularly that our Pacific family face is something that is very much, in very practical ways, a part of Australia's DNA. If there's anything we know, it's to stick with it and to make a commitment to meet it and to beat it. And as our friends and family in the Pacific know, and in Southeast Asia, we can be relied upon. We're helping our friends in Papua New Guinea build resilient roads, bridges and wharves. We've helped build cyclone-resistant produce markets for the Solomon Islands and Fiji. And last year, our prefabricated schoolrooms in Vanuatu withstood tropical cyclone Harold, giving the community a safe place to shelter, as well as the kids a chance to return to school sooner. Over 70% of our climate finance, and we've just doubled that here at COP26 to $2 billion to take us out to 2025, is focused on adaptation. And a very large proportion of it, as I was able to share with our Pacific nations families yesterday, will be directed to, specifically into Pacific Island nation states as part of a direct partnership with them, cutting out all the red tape and just getting the projects like the ones I've been talking about on the ground. The last 8 major disasters in the Pacific alone have wrought more than almost $2 billion worth of damage, so there's a lot more work to be done. The joint initiative we launched today, IRIS, lifts our ambition further to ensure the resilience of small island developing states, and through partnerships and expertise to drive even greater investment in quality infrastructure, energy, housing, transport, water, healthcare facilities. And I'm especially pleased to be here with my good friend, Prime Minister Bainimarama, and Prime Minister Juggernauth and Prime Minister Holness. It's a great pleasure to meet you. Leaders of 3 great small island nations. And I also want to thank, of course, India and the United Kingdom for their leadership of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And I acknowledge in particular the Quad support, including the US and Japan support, together with India, for the CDRI. I'm proud that Australia has already announced our $10 million commitment towards getting IRIS up and running, and I'm proud to be here to launch it today. All of us are here because we believe in fair and practical action to address climate change. We're here because we're family, particularly amongst our Pacific family, and all of us are here because we want to achieve those outcomes. Look out for another, look out for our mates, as we say in Australia, stick together, and let's get on with it.
Sorry, Scott, can I just add, before we go to Frank, can I just say one thing quickly, which I should have said, which I forgot unaccountably from my script. The UK is also, of course, contributing financially to IRIS, to infrastructure resilient island states, a point that I would not wish this audience to be in ignorance of. We're stumping up as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, Mbula Vanaka, and a very good morning to you all. Excellencies, yesterday marked the start of cyclone season in the South Pacific, a period now defined by record-smashing superstorms that can erase years of infrastructure progress in a matter of hours. I know because I've seen it happen. Whether it's storms, floods, or fires, the same hard lessons are being learned around the world. Building to last year's standards is building to lose. The world is warming, the impacts are terrifying, and the standards we build must be defined by and readied for those intensifying risks. It takes resources to build resilience, but we either pay to adapt now or pay a much higher price in the aftermath of climate-driven devastation. By becoming the first developing state to enact a comprehensive climate change act, Fiji will be required to adapt our building codes and standards to the climate reality and be inclusive of our green priorities. But there is a gap, trillions of dollars deep, between what vulnerable nations have and what they need to build resilience to a climate crisis we did next to nothing to cause. The welfare of people, both in developed and developing nations, depends on changes on the way we build and plan. Trillions of dollars may sound insurmountable, but the alternative is unthinkable. Even now, we are seeing what can happen when worsening climate-driven disasters meet outdated infrastructure and transport networks. Unchecked carbon emissions could see the foundation of our interconnected global marketplace fall out from under us. We can only bridge the financing gap between vulnerability and resilience if we fully enlist public and private sector sources of funding. We welcome India's launch of the Infrastructure Resilience Project for small island states. It's a promising start. Prime Minister Modi, sir, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. We trust this initiative will reach well beyond technical assistance and capacity building to unlock trillions in private sector capital. It can do that by de-risking critical investments now that will build resilience for those on the front line of the climate crisis. Fiji's Relocation and Displaced Peoples Trust Fund, which establishes a proven process to move at-risk communities and their infrastructure, is one example of where those funds can make an impact. Of course, the single most important measure we must take to protect our development progress is to drastically curtail the emissions that are changing the climate and forcing this crisis upon us. That is the responsibility of every nation, but the greater burden falls justly on the greatest emitters, if I think. If we fail to dramatically cut emissions, if we fail to move swiftly and immediately to free ourselves of our reliance on fossil fuels, we will fly past a 1.5-degree guardrail towards the levels of warming that totally will upend our understanding of resilience. It is the future that we are gathered here in Glasgow to prevent at all costs. Let's not forget it. Thank you. Vinaka.
Excellencies, friends, allow me to commend and congratulate the conveners of this timely initiative and to thank Prime Minister Modi in particular for his invitation. I well recall the meeting between India and the CARICOM leaders on the margins of the Unga a few years ago when PM Modi listened to our developmental concerns and pledged his support. In Jamaica, our resilience building efforts will shortly be boosted by a US $1 million grant from India to support the construction of facilities for sustainable agriculture. The initiative being launched today rightly focuses attention on SIDS, as we are on the front line of the climate crisis. As we all know, a single disaster can derail the entire budget of a small island developing state and set its economy back by years, reducing our fiscal space to finance climate adaptation and resilience efforts. Jamaica therefore sees capital investment both as a tool for economic growth enhancement, but also as a tool for climate proofing. It is in this context that we welcome this much needed initiative that reflects our own thinking around the pivotal role played by infrastructure in building resilience. In fact, the government of Jamaica is currently co-hosting the 7th UN Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean under the theme, Building Resilient Economies. Jamaica believes in innovation. As part of our national strategy and with development partners and the private sector, Jamaica will become the first country in the world to develop a predictive climate risk assessment planning tool for major infrastructure investments. Let me also share one transformational infrastructure project for which we're seeking support. We have conceptualized a solar-pumped hydroelectric storage project, similar to ones that you have done in Australia, utilizing our mountainous topography and abundant sunlight to solve our perennial problems of drought, while at the same time generating hydroelectric power. This would make clean, sustainable use of Jamaica's high concentration of fresh water resources in the north of our country to serve the large population centers and drought-prone agricultural south. In closing, again, I thank the conveners for their leadership in building this critical and practical coalition to advance the development of climate-resilient infrastructure. This is at the heart of building economic resilience in SIDS and a positive and decisive step in ensuring that we keep our commitment for 1.5.
Oh, that's it. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have great pleasure in joining you this morning for the launching of the infrastructure for resilient island states by the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Since its inception 2 years ago by Sri Narendra Modi ji, the coalition has grown into a global partnership platform to assist states, big and small, in improving disaster resilience of their infrastructure. Mauritius is proud to associate itself with the launch of IRIS, a SIDS-specific initiative that will undoubtedly help this group of countries to become more resilient, promote inclusive infrastructure, and ultimately achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. SIDS remain in the top list of the current World Risk Report 2021 of countries with high risk indices. Our island is negatively impacted by the effects of climate change. Extreme weather events occur frequently. Flash floods have resulted in loss of lives and caused serious damage to infrastructure. To build resilience, my government has invested massively in adaptation programs. A national flood management program costing 11.7 billion rupees will be implemented. Our National Action Plan 2020-2030 embodies the commitments of Mauritius to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and supports the implementation of international frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the SIDS accelerated modalities of action pathway. In addition, legal and institutional frameworks have been updated to implement disaster reduction strategies and disaster management. I wish to highlight that infrastructure and disaster risk reduction is very high in the adaptation measures that are contained in our reviewed nationally determined contributions. However, access to international financial support remains a critical component for building resilience. The use of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, developed by the UNDP earlier this year, is crucial to advancing global understanding of inherent vulnerabilities of the SIDS. By better understanding the existential issues that SIDS face, we are hopeful that innovative mechanisms such as the IRIS will flourish. Coupled with adapted financing, such partnerships would go a long way towards assisting SIDS mitigate their disaster vulnerability and improve the resilience of their infrastructure. Thank you.
Small island developing states or SIDS are home to unique landscapes, vibrant cultures and traditions. However, SIDS also face the highest disaster losses in proportion to their GDP. They face large economic, social and environmental challenges compounded by climate change threatening their very existence. Resilient infrastructure is a key driver in mitigating disaster and climate risks while also meeting the development aspirations of SIDS. SIDS are already taking actions to implement the Samoa pathway. But this cannot be done alone. There is a need for broader partnerships for resilient island nations. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is a global partnership that aims to build climate and disaster resilience into infrastructure systems to ensure sustainable development.
I would like to say that CDRI has set a challenging and urgent agenda for itself.
The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. The UK is proud to be its co-chair.
We are all at the front lines